Hello, my name is Tim O, and I'm with Upheaval, the makers of Ironweave. We protect people's secrets by putting individual units of data in independently encrypted blocks. And why that's relevant for this room, payments are just another form of data, so we can help facilitate private, compliant financial transactions for groups such as Societe Generale, and also chains like Stellar, among others. And allow you, Sylvain, and Denelle to introduce yourselves, please.
Hello everyone. So I'm Simon Lejeune, I'm the CPO of Societe Generale Forge. We are a subsidiary of Societe Generale, and we are focused on stablecoins, so it's good to be here. And we have two stablecoins, one in euro and one in dollar. And so we try to deploy in different networks. We'll come back on it later.
Hi everyone, I'm Denelle Dixon. I'm the CEO and Executive Director of the Stellar Development Foundation. We support the growth of the Stellar network and the ecosystem around it.
Great. So by the end of this lecture or panel, we hope that all of you will be able to issue your own bank-backed stablecoin. So first we're going to see how the sausage was made or the crepes were made at Societe Generale. So Sylvain, if you could walk us through where this all began. So 160-year-old bank, lots of different divisions. What was the genesis of the move into digital assets? And how did we get where we are today from that beginning?
That's a good question. So we started as an internet startup. To onboard Societe Generale Group, we started with security token. We receive a lot of validation from the group in order to provide customer group with bond and structured products in token format, all with existing regulation, so on MiFID things. And so with the time being, we did some experiments with the crypto space, especially with Maker, that makes some noise internally, especially because to work with Maker at that time was not so used, and we take time to do it. We took 2 years to deliver this use case, and with this use case, we decided to go through stablecoin issuance, because at the end, stablecoin is just another financial product without the same regulation, but it's just another financial product. We have all the let's say the brick in place in the bank, so in cash account, all this kind of stuff. And so when you clean all the compliance side, when you clean all the license things, I don't say it's easy, but you can start deploying your stablecoin, and the group was behind us in order to promote this business case.
So let's go a little deeper. So now take us backstage. What different groups had to be involved? And how did you get through all these hoops and hurdles inside the bank?
Well, a lot of departments from the group, so compliance, of course. We are 30 people from Societe Generale Forge, so it's not so huge. But we outsource a lot of things in the group, and that's why they are deeply involved, because we outsource the key stuff in the group, so risk, operational risk, market risk, counterparty risk, all is on Societe Generale. Compliance, and I was quite surprised when I started Societe Generale Forge, the number of compliance we have just for 30 people. So we have 86 departments for compliance, from EML, sanction, a lot of things, GDPR, so it's quite impressive, and all the operational things. In order to impact in the legacy system, the risk exposition that we have on Societe Generale. And all the governance also is outsourced to Societe Generale. So we have some governance in place that is more TradFi, but need to report at the ECB level and other European jurisdiction, like NPC, so the European Committee, this kind of governance. It's very important for bank, and we go through this kind of NPC. So let's say there is 10 departments, and it could be 100 people in the group that's working on part of Societe Generale.
And then we talked about how you created kind of like a Skunkworks app, where you had this digital asset group was outside of the main mothership, and that allowed you to work a bit more nimbly, more like a startup than a huge 160-year-old bank. And then also talk about how you were able to operate within this huge institution using the smallest team, which often we've seen in financial institutions is like a redheaded stepchild. Now it's getting a lot more popularity, but back then it was difficult to get a lot of traction from the mothership. So how did you do that?
As it is an international startup, we were quite flexible at that time, and we were outside Societe Generale. So we find, I think it was the biggest issue, and we studied for the better. It means that we find a way to have our own flexibility for important governance within Societe Generale. So I talked about NPC, but we have an NPC that is for Societe Generale where we have a decision committee, and we don't rely on some specific part of the group for that. And I think that I thought it was a key point. And with the time, Societe Generale want to bring some external stuff within Societe Generale, and that's why now we are clearly 100% Societe Generale for all the governance and cyber and operational team. But this governance things that was outside was really important.
Thank you. Now, Denelle, you see many different financial institutions. Stellar was the OG payments chain, worked with the United Nations, with MoneyGram, now with Societe Generale, and many others. So now things have changed, especially in the US with this new administration and new legislation that's coming. It's kind of like you had this girl who, at least for me, pulled her pigtails back in the 7th grade, and she had braces and was unattractive, and then she goes away for the summer, and she comes back, and she's this beautiful girl. So now you're getting all this attention. So who are you speaking to, and what is the process like for you to work with groups like Societe Generale to see them through this process with all the expertise that you have, which they might not have?
I've just never had Stellar described that way. I just kind of want to sit in that for a second. It's been great. I mean, I think that one of the things that many people probably didn't know is that even during the time when no one was supposed to be, like banks weren't supposed to be talking to blockchains or building on blockchains, they were doing it. And so they were doing it on testnet, or they were doing it sort of behind the scenes. They weren't issuing the asset publicly, but they really wanted to get into the business. And it was kind of frustrating because they would get to the very end of it and then not be able to issue on mainnet because of what was happening in the United States. And so now it's just a completely different world. And so, you know, I think even back in the early days, it was more about like, we got to get on blockchain because we got to be cool. It was when blockchain was cool before AI came out. Blockchain was like the cool space, right? Now we're like a second-class citizen. But the idea now is that everybody's really focusing on the why. Like, why should we build on blockchain instead of we have to build on blockchain? It's what is it going to be valuable for? And that's what's most exciting to me, is because so many businesses are really looking at Stellar and looking at other chains and saying, this actually really suits our business needs to be able to build these assets on blockchain and deliver that value into not just our own companies, but also to the retail side and also the other businesses that will use it.
It will be interesting to understand what type of support you give these financial institutions that are looking to leverage Stellar. Because through my research, I found out that back in 2019, Franklin Templeton got zero support from Stellar all the way through the filing with the SEC. So explain yourself, please. Yeah,
it was super cool, actually. We had actually had our first Meridian, which is our annual conference, and it was I think 2 days after Meridian in November of 2019, when we saw the SEC filing that Franklin Templeton put out to explain that they were building on Stellar. the coolest part about that for me is that I'm all about open source. I'm all about the tech speaking for itself. That's sort of like the whole genesis of my career and what I focused on. And so we didn't support them before. We do now, and we work very closely with them. But it was amazing to us that they actually saw the value of the tech, and they wanted to come to build on Stellar because they saw that all the things they needed from an asset issuance standpoint, the compliance pieces, all of that were there. And they were able to get that through the SEC at a time when it's shocking that the SEC was actually engaged around that, a different part of the SEC than on the regulatory side. So we support, now institutions come to us, and now it's because of Franklin Templeton, I think, especially in the money market fund side, they come to us for support from a tech standpoint. And so we have product support, we have technical support from an engineering standpoint. We also help them with respect to liquidity needs sometimes, and also getting listed on different exchanges. And we really think about what these assets are going to do in the ecosystem. So we combine a lot of these players with other players in the ecosystem. So think of us as like a convener. So we help obviously on the tech side, but we really try to bring everyone together and help them to build what they need to build.
Interesting, because it's an important point for institutional like us. The main point is the crypto space is all about liquidity and support on exchanges, and to have foundations that could help us on this point, either on the support of your token stuff, but also on the liquidity side in order to provide market maker with loan or whatever agreement is very important. And this ecosystem is really not the same than TradFi. In TradFi, all is about loan but with collateral. And for example, market makers don't like collateral, but because they don't like collateral, they prefer unsecured loan in order to have reserve in both assets and especially with the convertible. And so to have agreement with a foundation that can provide this kind of reserve to our market maker is very important for us, because the balance sheet cost is reduced, and to be honest, it's really expensive, this business case of Commerzbank. So for that, it's good.
Yeah, we actually, I mean, one of the things that I think is really important, and maybe all of you understand it, I don't think a lot of people who get in this business initially understand it. You can't just issue an asset and then be like, all right, we're done. Let's just let it be. You gotta like really figure out like how to get that asset to be used, how to make sure that there's liquidity for the asset, what is the value of the asset into the ecosystem that you're deploying. It's a really important piece of understanding, you know, which blockchain makes sense for you to deploy on first and what you're going to get from each of the blockchains. Stellar is really amazing for payments and asset issuance, and you really think about everyday financial services. Those are the kinds of businesses and entities that you're going to meet on Stellar and that you're going to be with on Stellar. And so you got to think, is that the right space? Hopefully it is. And those are all really good questions to think through when you're, as a bank, as an institution, thinking about where to deploy and why.
And there is a misconception also on the stablecoin business, because every bank wants to do now they want to do their own stablecoin, and it's not so easy. So when I spoke with other bank, and I said, why do you want to issue your own stablecoin? You can use us. We try to find liquidity. We can make it together. It will be easier. But people want to have their own stablecoin. Maybe there is some reason, because today, and I think it's the main problem, is our stablecoin is used for payments, so it's only a payment thing, and the funding part. So I mean all the liquidity ratio behind the business, like LCR and SFR, this kind of stuff, will be applicable only on the cash reserve. And so that's why they want to propose their own stablecoin. But I think if we have a clear regulatory and prudential clarity on stablecoin, it will make it easy to have not 10,000 stablecoin, but maybe 10, 20, but a good one, in order to have a sustainable ecosystem. We will see.
So speaking of the ecosystem and the different players in it, so there are a bunch of different roles that need to be filled in order to launch and maintain a successful stablecoins. You have custodians, you have market makers, you have exchanges. These are all people that are now outside Societe Generale, but you need to interact with them in order for Stellar to be able to do its special sauce and to allow the community to come together to actually use this in a new way. Can you talk to us about how those relationships evolved? And maybe Denelle, you can jump in and talk about how you can facilitate these types of relationships. And then what it's like inside a 160-year-old bank to get them to approve using this market maker, this custodian. And then maybe as a follow-up after Denelle speaks, it'd be interesting to then talk about how the DeFi protocols get approved to use the stablecoin so that you can actually use the stablecoin in DeFi, which is where the flywheel almost always starts, before then migrating into the traditional finance world. That's a lot. Let's start with ecosystem partners, how those relationships evolved, and how you got signed off to use these different parties in general.
It was a long journey to have this kind of entity onboarding within Societe Generale. It's a lot of educational thing within Societe Generale. And it's something that we don't see, but we spend a lot of time to discuss with our compliance and risk officer. We also have a partnership with a training school, Polytechnic in France, in order to provide, to send them in this training program and to be comfortable with this technology. So all this kind of stuff is important because at the end, all the onboarding is done by this department, and they need to be aware of what is the technology, how we can use this technology, and how we can use KYT stuff in order to be comfortable with the monitoring and the EML things of the onboarding. For example, our first exchange was Bitstamp, and I think it took 1.5 years to onboard Bitstamp. And so it's a long time ago now. We have now a process that could onboard crypto entity faster. So normally we have a SLA with a group in order to onboard in less than 5 months. It's good compared to 1 year and a half. And all has been all thanks to this educational purpose. After there is another thing, is you do the onboarding, and after you need to do business with entity. For example, for market maker, we need to find a way to give us some loan in order to make their activity, because they don't want to buy too much stablecoin because of balance sheet, because of this kind of stuff. And so you need to go through a credit file within Societe Generale. And for example, today, even if market maker is quite big, because we're working with 3 market makers, and quite big market maker, there is still the reflex on the one side, on the credit file side, to rate this entity as junk and fund. So the rating is absolutely horrible, and the capital that we need to put in front of this activity is very huge, and sometimes it costs a lot for just to have a 10 million loan. So there is still a problem with onboarding of this entity, because bank doesn't consider the financial statement of the firm, but they consider that there is risk, reputational risk, and there is crypto inside, and so you need to put some bad rating. So you need to have this kind of thing that could go better.
I feel for you. So, Denelle, how do you work with?
Yeah. So we.
Think about it and then introduce them, work with them, help them understand. Because there's probably a lot of people that are calling you now, and they're not half as knowledgeable as Selena is. So
right. There's a bunch of players who have built their own tech, their own technology teams that they can build it out. There's some that use third parties that we can actually help them to engage with third parties. I think about like where we were even like 4 years ago and where we are today. We think about this very differently. So we approach every asset issuer that comes to us. Not all of them do, by the way. Many of them issue assets on Stellar without engaging with the foundation. But when they do, we actually think about it as a product launch. So we think, okay, like what do we need? Who needs to be involved in this from a product launch standpoint to make it successful? Because any asset issued on Stellar, we want it to actually be successful in the market, because otherwise, what's the point of putting all the effort into it from the tech standpoint and also from the bank standpoint? So we think about like what do we need, where is this going to be focused? Like what region do you want to start in? And then we think like what are the wallets that are going to leverage it? What are the institutions that we need to be able to hold those assets? And then we also help them to think through like what are the exchanges that you need to be listed on? And that's when the liquidity issues come into play too. So we introduce them to a lot of the players that are already building on the network, and then we also can bring new players in. when we think about that. We also, it depends on if you're doing an asset that's a native asset on Stellar or you're doing it on Sorbonne, which is the smart contract. There's like auditing that we actually support. We have audit firms that come in and we pay for some of those audits to happen of the smart contract itself. Like we do a bunch of these kinds of things to help to make everything really successful for everyone as it comes to it. So very different from the early days when we were kind of fast and loose with it. We think about every step. And also, even before any particular institution comes to us, we've tried to, especially when you think about Sorbonne, which is our smart contract platform, as we built that, we built it for redundancy. So we thought about which players do we need to have in the smart contract ecosystem, and then let's have 4 of them, so that we make sure that everyone's there, so that you have a selection to choose from. So we really approach it very differently than historically, and I think it's super useful for the institutions that are now coming to us.
Makes sense. Now, getting back to the other part of this question that I was hinting at earlier. So these stablecoins don't live in a vacuum. When they launch, typically they are released into the DeFi wild. So you have exchanges, you have lending protocols. So how is your stablecoins being integrated into these DeFi protocols? And what is it like for you to persuade your colleagues internally to play ball in this permissionless world?
Maybe next week, if I come back, I will say how I am in the DeFi protocol, because it's not the case today. So we are not integrated with DeFi protocol. We hope we are working a lot on that point, but there is a lot of constraints, especially how we can onboard DeFi protocol, how we validate DeFi protocol. So we try to do it with Ethereum protocol first, with some lending borrowing protocol and exchanges protocol to open the new and other distribution channel. But I don't have the key now, so sorry for that. Maybe next week, next year.
Good idea.
Sorry.
That's all right. Well, Denelle, can you speak to this with some of the other institutions that you're working with? How do they solve this issue?
Well, everyone wants to get into DeFi, but not everyone can get into DeFi right now, I think, from the asset issuer standpoint. And so a lot of them, we actually do the same exact thing, as I said, think about it as a product launch. And so we think about who are the players they need to be working with in that on Sorbonne in that space, and what do we need to bring to the ecosystem for them to be able to. There are very few institutions that have issued the assets that are regulated institutions that have issued assets that are in the DeFi protocols at this point. Some of them are from a wrapped standpoint, but maybe not native, and they all want to be though. And that's one of the things that I'll be honest and tell you that we didn't have a smart contract platform. We were super cool without it, and then we realized we needed to be able to do this because it was really important to be able to have this kind of opportunity for everyone to use DeFi. You could do a lot of this in native Stellar, but you couldn't do it yourself. So you couldn't figure it out how to do it yourself and just make whatever you wanted to make. And so that's why we built Sorbonne for this issue. So I think that every asset issuer that comes to us wants to play in the DeFi space. Most of them cannot yet, if they're regulated financial institutions, but they want to. And maybe next week we'll hear a different story.
But for example, we have some, because as a bank, we need to validate what we plan to do through our regulator. So we bring to the regulator the fact that we will appreciate to be DeFi and to validate the fact to interact directly with some protocol. So to bootstrap the liquidity, to own our own reserve of convertible, and yes, we validate it. And so the answer was quite strange because by default the regulator don't trust you. By default the regulator don't like stablecoin because now they push the digital euro, so they are not really comfortable with private stablecoin. And so they say no, except if you go through intermediaries. So you need to go through intermediaries. You cannot do it by yourself, and it slows down the process.
Saying intermediaries when interacting with the regulators?
No, intermediaries to interact with the protocols.
I see.
So market maker, broker.
And then we have a minute left, so let's just talk about liquidity and how you do bootstrap liquidity and provide fuel to these DeFi protocols through the intermediaries, or entice the intermediaries to provide that liquidity so that you can actually take wings and fly.
It's all about loan. So we need to provide loan to this entity. We are working also with the foundation in order to help us on that. So yes, it's all about loan, and I hope later when the group will be comfortable with crypto, so to get crypto on their balance sheet, to have a secure loan with Bitcoin, Ether, would be very helpful.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Denelle. You are now all prepared to issue your own next stablecoin. So, go ahead.